Coley here, April the 22nd, 2015, and we're going to talk about a few subjects today. And first up, I want to talk for a little bit about the Ukraine situation. We seem to be inching ever closer to, well, spring is here, and I guess that's the fighting season. So Canada just have sent over some 200 men to help train the Kiev forces, the West Ukrainians, the right sector, so-called right sector. These are the Nazi-esque people to learn how to be better soldiers so that they can kill the so-called terrorists, the people of the eastern side of the country. And the United States sent soldiers over there already as trainers. But you have to remember, this is how Vietnam started, folks. In case some of you younger people that just don't remember, Vietnam started the same way. We sent trainers over there, and they weren't supposed to fight, and they were just there to train the South Vietnamese how to guard and protect their rice farms from attack by the North Vietnamese, who were coming down and demanding a tax. But in this case, we've got the people of the one side of Ukraine, literally half the Ukraine, the eastern side, had a legitimate vote, and they voted, as you know, to become part of the Russian Federation. Now, all of Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, and when that whole thing broke up, the wall fell, Ukraine was turned into a sovereign, separate country. It didn't join the EU, was not a member of NATO, and there was an understanding at the time when the wall fell that we were all happy about that, because up until then we were all in fear of a nuclear war. And I remember as a child ducking under the desk all the time. About twice a week we would have an air raid drill, and the siren would sound, and we had a great big blasting siren in the middle of the town of Haddonfield that would blow in the event of an emergency, and then we would have to hide under our desk. I mean, it was terrifying. And being a kindergartner and first grader and having this, I mean, there really wasn't any, didn't seem to serve a whole lot of purpose, because if something like that happened, I don't think hiding under the desk would have necessarily done anything. It certainly wouldn't have helped us any. But I just don't want that to happen again, folks. And I'm afraid that this Ukrainian thing could collapse, and over a fight over a part of the country that wants to break away. It had a legitimate vote, and I believe in my mind, heart, and soul, and based upon the UN and the rules and the regulations, that the people shall have the right to self-determination, that if they vote to become a part of Russia, and Russia in fact takes them in, especially given the fact that they were not a part of the European Union or any other organized conglomerate of countries, I do not understand why there would be any pressure applied to these people to not be able to live the life that they want and join China if they wanted, or maybe they want to become Americans, and they could have said they wanted to become Americans, and then maybe the Congress could have had a vote, and maybe they could have turned them into a U.S. state. But they didn't do that. They speak Russian. They wanted to become a part of the Russian Federation, and they knew what that meant, because they were Soviet Union. They were part of the Soviet Union before, so they had decades to decide as a completely neutral country what they wanted to do. And part of the country, the east side, speaks Russian, and the other side speaks Ukrainian, and there are a lot of Nazis there who hid there after World War II, and they still have that Nazi mentality. and now they're being fueled and aided by the United States, Canada, and NATO and the European Union, and it's basically helping to encircle Russia. Now, when the wall fell, there wasn't anything in writing that said, look, we're not going to turn the Ukraine into a European Union state or part of NATO. As a matter of fact, there was kind of a verbal understanding and a kind of nodding of the heads and a winking of the eyes that the whole purpose of NATO was going to just go away, and that the whole earth was going to calm down, and we were all at that point, you know, the internet was being born, and we were all able to communicate more easily, and became friendly enough that it just wasn't necessary to have you know, hostilities between our two countries. The Soviet Union was pretty much bankrupt, which is quite frankly where we could be headed. We could be headed down the same road that the Soviet Union. I mean, they collapsed because they didn't have any money. They just went broke. They didn't have any food. They had housing problems. They had problems buying medicine and food for their people. And so they had so many problems that supporting a war to try to feed some kind of a war machine and keep up with this with a space race, and to keep up with a nuclear arms race and a space defense race, and put a man on the moon. I mean all these things coming together was just a lot of pressure, and the Russians at some point made a decision that all of this just wasn't worth it. It's just kind of like today. I mean, you have to make a decision about what really is more important to you. Is it more important to you as a country and to keep your people happy, to be able to feed them easily, and to have agriculture going at full speed, and to have people, you know, being able to work in jobs, and even if they can't work a full-time job, that even a part-time job would give them enough money to at least afford to pay their bills and keep their lights on and buy some food and buy a cheap bomb car. And if they're doing better and they're up in the middle class, then they could afford to have a nicer house and maybe 2 cars and a good insurance policy and health insurance as well, and car insurance and homeowners insurance and all the things that you would normally have in a middle-income household. And if you're wealthy, well, that's you know, if you're part of the 1 or the 2% at the top, then those people kind of take care of themselves. But the Soviet Union, at some point, they made a decision. They said, hey, look, you know, it's more important for us to be able to feed our people. Furthermore, I mean, the people weren't happy, and I kind of get the impression that maybe if that wall hadn't fallen and the economy had just gotten any worse, that there would have been protesting in the streets, and perhaps there already was. But in any case, the people wanted the wall to fall, and the Russian people wanted to be friends with the Europeans. The European people wanted to be friends with the Russians, and they felt like they just felt like they were being held apart by the politics of having this wall up there, and not to mention the fact that they had, you know, atomic weapons pointed at each other, and the risk that something could go wrong. And given the fact that the Russian economy, the Soviet Union, was collapsing, the possibility that even some of these weapons, in an act of final desperation for money, could have been sold to a third party or something for money, in an effort to make the general, who was maybe had may have been able to legally get his hands on a warhead, and maybe he would have sold it to an oil-rich Saudi country or Iraq or Iran or something like that, in exchange for oil, because they were starving to death. I mean, all of these things are genuine concerns, but the bottom line is, in the end, the people won out, which is what is going to happen here too. It's like the United States wants to control the internet because they want to control the freedom of speech. That's the real biggie, see, because the people, if you take the average person and you put him in a room with someone else, I mean, at some point they're going to start talking and they're going to become friendly, and I guess that's probably why prisoners don't like to go in solitary confinement. You would think, okay, well, this guy's a really bad criminal or whatever, but as bad of a criminal as he might be, putting that man in solitary confinement isn't something he wants. You would think that, well, maybe he would be happier just to be left alone because he has an attitude problem and so forth and so on. But people are people are social creatures, and they don't want to be left alone. They want to have friends. And the whole theory that you have anger between nations, it's really governments that are sort of propagating this whole thing. And not just governments, but you have governments, fascism, where they contract with companies that build weapons, and then of course in an effort to get a contract to build the weapons, there has to be a boogeyman. So now, for example, in the United States, if the United States can't say that Russia represents some kind of a threat, then there isn't going to be a need to build a better Abrams tank, or to build a better fighter jet, or a more powerful Apache helicopter, attack helicopter, or figure out some way of putting weapons in space, which is, I mean, the whole thing is just a recipe for disaster, because here you have got people on the ground with real problems, and one of the leading problems, in my view, is the radiation problem coming from Fukushima, which, and Fukushima, by the way, it's obviously a major problem, but it could be followed up at any time by a cracked water pipe at any one of 100 American nuclear power plants. So we have issues that are important enough that, we don't need to put our money into generating a boogeyman and to force people into a situation where they're asked to fight. And they don't really want to fight. I mean, God didn't put, whatever God you believe in, didn't put people on the earth to fight each other. Most people want to live a happy life, and they would like to have children. They would like to be left alone. They don't want to have a government that's going to take away their wages from whatever job that they might have. And frankly, if people could have anything they want, I think that they would stay home with their man would probably like to stay home with his wife all day and pick flowers and make their yard look as nice as possible, and paint their house and make their house look better. But you have to earn an income, so there has to be work involved. But I envision a future where you're going to see, in the end, that the people are going to win out over these governments that are trying to put their thumb down on the people in an effort to stay oligarch-like and fascist by telling the people of their country that they have enemies. And that's where you have these false flags, where the government has got to prove to the people that there's an enemy out there, boogeyman, so to speak, of some sort. We have to have weapons so that we can save ourselves. But it's funny that they don't want the people to have the weapons, because I believe that their fear is, well, the people are going to put two and two together and figure that the government is making these stories up about the boogeyman, and if they all had their own weapons, and I'm not talking about criminals here, I'm just talking about normal, straight people, that the Constitution, well, the Founding Fathers wanted to be able to have, bear, and carry arms without infringement. I'm sure at that time they didn't want criminals to have arms. So let's just say the criminals don't have guns, but the people who don't have felonious records, those people should be allowed to have guns. And if that were the case, then you would have a situation where the government would be controllable more by the people versus the people being controlled by a government. Because when you have a government that is starting to turn fascist, like what we have in the United States, you've got the military-industrial complex that we were warned about just running roughshod by continually preaching on the television set that, you know, the Russians have invaded Ukraine. The Russians have not invaded Ukraine. But that's what they want you to believe, because now all of a sudden you have people like the Clintons, who, by the way, have their hands in the pockets of these the NATO countries. When they buy their arms and their weapons and their bullets and planes and aircraft. The Clintons all get a part of that. And amazingly, I've discovered today that the Clintons get a big benefit when these NATO countries buy arms. So it's either direct or indirect, but in any case, the more war there is around the world, the more money the Clintons make. And oddly enough, now we have the 2016 election cycle has just begun, and the Clintons could use every penny that they could get in an effort to run for president. So now we see Biden, the vice president's son, has got a $2 billion stake in Gazprom over there in the Ukraine. So not only is he working over there as the attorney for Gazprom, but he's also got a $2 billion stake. Well, I mean, I ask you, I mean, who gave him or lent him $2 billion to have a stake in the company? The United States wants there to be a war between one side of the Ukraine versus the other, because the gross domestic product is going to go up. See, they count all the making of the bombs and bullets and aircraft, helicopters, and uniforms for the men, boots. I mean, literally everything. The GDP is going to go up because millions, if not billions of dollars are going to be spent defending the Ukraine. Now, frankly, if you were to look at the, you know, how many forces there are in NATO, I mean, it's considerable, and it's got a considerable force, but the European Union is not really flush with cash right now. They're all the European Union countries are in debt now, right up to, if not above, their agreed limit based upon the gross domestic product as to how much money that they're allowed to borrow from their banks. So they're not really in a position to get into a war. And furthermore, if you were to talk to the average guy on the street, he would say, no, I definitely don't want to get drafted. I don't want to go to war. And if you asked them, you know, did Russia do anything bad to you, they would say, well, why would you even ask a stupid question like that? You know, Russia hasn't done anything bad to us. And now we're not allowed to sell our food to Russia. So now the farmers in the European nations that grow food have food, and it's just they've got nobody to sell it to, because when the sanctions were applied to Russia, it's the stupidest thing in the world, because Obama applied banking sanctions at a time when Russia and China and some of the South American countries and India, they're trying to form the BRIC Bank, which they already did, I guess, and that's going to be open in earnest. I guess it's open now, but it's going to be open in earnest any time. Now, certainly by the end of the year, it's going to be cranking along, making loans, and at this time to put sanctions on Russia, to say, well, you know, we're going to take you out of our SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is the mechanism by which SDRs are drawn, and to help transfer the money to pay for goods and services sold from one country to the other. And the U.S. bank, because these transactions are based in dollars, the U.S. banks make a commission. It's like no different than you going to the ATM machine and you take out $100 and the ATM machine says, by the way, there's a $3 cost for this transaction. Do you agree? Yes or no? Well, I mean, you have to say yes, or you don't get your deposit. So, but I mean, when the country of Russia, when it was a part of the SWIFT system, whenever they would transact business, being it was in dollars, especially with respect to oil and gas, because it was all denoted in dollars up until recently. Now Russia's trying to bypass that, and they're going to be successful in doing it. They're doing it already by using trade as a way to get around. The United States, I mean, at the worst possible minute, when they should have been doing everything in their power to induce Russia and China to stick with the dollar as a reserve currency and to instill confidence in the dollar so that they wouldn't want to open up their own bank. It would be no, I mean, the cost of the paperwork to countries like Russia to switch out their way of paying for goods and services in trade, which the Fed gets a portion of all of those transactions. And I don't think this was the Fed's idea. Like I told you before, the Fed is an independent corporation. I'm sure it wasn't their idea, but then the Congress kicked Russia out of the SWIFT system, and Vladimir Putin, and I'd have done the same thing if I was Mr. Putin. He just said, well, okay, screw you guys, we're just going to make our own banking system, which, I mean, he was kind of like teeter-tottering like this. They were sort of going to do it anyway. And you know, Germany had asked for their gold back, and I think the reason that they asked for their gold back is because the new system that they're starting up, this brick bank thing, is money that is backed by gold. And the reason they wanted to back it by gold is because it would take the fascism out of it, it would take the oligarchy out of it, it would take the malintent out of it, and it would keep the whole system honest and ethical and moral. Because if you have a system where somebody owns the printing press and it's a private corporation, I mean, that's about as close to playing God as a human being on earth as you can be, because now you have this printing press and you're printing dollars, and because you're an independent corporation, you could lend this money to whoever you want. Now presumably, when the United States asks you for a loan, I mean, what are you going to say? The United States gave you license for the franchise for the Fed to operate the printing press. So if the United States of America says, well, look, we're going to give you the exclusive franchise to print the money, you're going to say, yes, I want the franchise to print the money. I mean, who wouldn't want the franchise to print the money? Moreover, then, if this ability to print the money is not backed by, you know, needing gold deposits anymore, like it used to be years ago, and it's petrodollar based, which is coming from Saudi Arabia, and your deal with them is, look, the United States military is going to keep the House of Saud in power, and in return, Saudi Arabia is going to pump out oil and make that oil denoted in dollars. So when it's sold in dollars. So, you know, in a way it's backed by something, in a way it's not. So every time they dig a barrel of oil out of the ground, then they can say, well, we have a sort of a semi-legitimate reason to print more money because more oil is being taken out of the ground. But now that oil is going to just be burned up, so once the oil passes through the engine of your car and is gone, now it's done something. So I suppose on the one hand you could say, well, it's produced something, but the production of whatever it did with respect to, say, travel is gone now, because I've already enjoyed the travel, but now that is gone. But the money that backed that backed that oil when it was purchased, it was just printed off of a printing press, is been burned up in the automobile engine, and that oil either produced something that's still around that would have taken maybe 20 men. It might have done the work of 20 men for an hour. So maybe maybe it allowed someone to build a house very quickly, so the house might still be standing, so the value of those dollars is still there. Or on the other hand, like I said, it could have been used simply for travel, and now that money, the only thing left of that money is the memory of the people who used it to travel. And so, so the brick system is based on gold, and with the thought being that if we have this new dollar that's going to be the reserve currency, and it's based on something that cannot be easily reproduced or burned up or used up, and that way nobody can just go literally insane and start printing up a lot of money and having a quantitative easing, which is nothing more than the government saying, well, we want to give ourselves raises, or we don't want to go through austerity and cut everybody's Social Security check down and lay off half of the governmental servants. They can pay any debt, and they never have to worry about defaulting. So, I mean, that's the upside to it. But the downside to it is they can be immoral, and especially if you have the owner of this bank is a private organization that can make loans to other countries. Now, there's good to that in a way, because if you are that bank and you're able to put another country in debt, and the debt is backed by the full faith and payment capacity of that country to collect taxes from its citizens and then pay you back in dollars, and they have to work hard, because to make a dollar over there, they might have to work really, really hard, because the money is being printed over here, and none of them have government jobs. So you don't have government workers who are making money and spending those dollars that are US dollars in their economy, and then they can't hire someone to, say, mow their lawn and then get a dollar. So it's harder for them to get a dollar. So, but I mean, this whole system was kind of going along like this, and now all of a sudden, recently we've got the sanctions that come down on Russia over a war in Ukraine that really, whether or not the East wins or the West wins, I mean, it doesn't matter who wins, because the Ukraine was an independent country all along anyway for the last, since the wall fell, and it didn't make a hill of beans worth of difference to really anybody in the United States. I mean, it did make a difference to me whether the Ukraine belonged to Russia or whether the Ukraine belonged to the European Union. I mean, I didn't care at all. It didn't make any difference to me. I never really thought about it, to tell you the truth, until this whole thing blew up. And but for the Europeans, what we're finding out now is the reason that this, part of the reason that this whole thing happened is because Gazprom, the gas company for Russia, uses the Ukrainian territory to run pipelines, because Russia has a lot of natural gas and they pipe it through, and the European Union buys the natural gas, and so they buy it from Russia, and in return Russia buys goods from the European Union. So there's a sort of a balance of trade there, and everything's going along fine, and the pipelines flow through the Ukraine. So if there's a war over who owns the land that the pipe goes over, and I guess they tax any gas that goes through the pipe, there's like a tax, like a franchise tax or something. So that's kind of like their way of making money without doing anything, because if they take the gas out of the ground, then then their money is literally backed by something that they've created because they took something that was substantial or worth something out of the ground. But on the other hand, if the gas just transits through, they can charge a sort of a transit tax fee, you know, like a pipe maintenance fee or maybe a pipe rental fee or a combination of all those things. So they want to control the land that the pipe goes over. That's why you see a lot of these wars and over there with these gas lines that go between Pakistan, like Iran and Pakistan, or Iran and India, or Iran and well, you get the gist. But whoever has the gas is digging something valuable out of the ground, so they're going to be able to get money and they're going to sell it in whatever. Nobody can really at this point stop them anymore from selling it whatever they want to sell it in. Or if they don't have any money, they can reach an agreement to sell the gas for gold, or they can sell the gas for food. Maybe the other country has food, one country has gas. So now they're starting to look for other ways to trade money, because you have people like Obama who really screwed up and said, well, we're going to take Russia off the SWIFT system. I mean, why would you want to do that? I mean, it's not really helping anybody, and Russia is a large enough country now that you just can't say stuff like that to them, because they're just going to say, okay, look, if that's what you want to do, we'll just hire 20 experts and we'll make our own SWIFT system, and we're going to start dealing in bricks, or we're going to be dealing in rubles, and then later we're going to be dealing in bricks, and we don't need the American currency. And a country the size of the Soviet Union, or Russia rather, or America, you really can't bring down by putting sanctions on them, because everything they need pretty much is already within their geographical sphere of influence. Just like in the United States, I mean, everything we need to live and be alive, and maybe not have a perfect life, but everything that we need, we have our own oil, we have nuclear power plants, enough electricity to power anything. We don't need to buy any electricity from anybody else. We don't need to buy oil from anybody else if we were completely cut off. You know, I remember when I was in high school, last year of high school, I worked at a gas station. I graduated in '73. It was the last 2 years. And there was the Arab oil embargo of 1973. You probably remember that. Maybe not, the young kids don't. But when we got cut off because of the Iranians getting angry at us, and there was the hostage crisis, as you may recall, and the imports just stopped, and so we weren't making oil in the United States. The reason being that the cost to make a barrel of oil here was so expensive that it was easier to import the oil from overseas. And so it kept the United States oil in the ground. Now, I mean, looking back, okay, so back then we had a problem, and gas was, I don't know, 29 cents a gallon. Then it jumped to like 39 cents a gallon or 34 cents a gallon. Everybody's like, oh my God. But it wasn't just the increase in the price. It was whether or not you could even get it. And I remember I had just gotten my driver's license. You have to be 17 in New Jersey to drive, and that's where I lived. And where I worked, I was pumping gas at an Arco gas station, and I was learning, when I wasn't pumping gas, I was fixing engines, and there were a couple of really good mechanics there, and they were teaching me how to fix engines, how to do valve jobs and all. So when I wasn't pumping gas, I was learning how to fix engines. So, look, I firmly believe in the mentor system. I mean, I didn't have a formal education in how to fix an engine, but I learned because they had some really good mechanics there, and they showed me how to do a brake job. They showed me how to do a valve job on an engine, how to take the heads off. They told me how to change water pumps, how to change an alternator. And so, I mean, I learned a lot by working there because I was mentored by the mechanics, and just like I was mentored later in the insurance business by Clarence Stevenson. But anyway, getting back to the story here, when the Arab oil embargo hit, we had an odd and even rationing system because They were nervous that somebody would buy all the gas, and there was only so much to go around. So, in an effort to keep anybody from hoarding gas, you had to have on an odd day, like if it was the 22nd of April, then your license plate had to be an even number. If it was like the 3rd of April, then you had to have an odd number as the last digit on your license plate, and otherwise I couldn't put gas in your car. And we had lines that went down the street. I mean, here I was standing there pumping gas, and there was never a line to pump. I mean, I lived in a small town, and there was only one or two gas. I think there were 2 gas stations in the town. So I worked in one of 2 gas stations in the town, and never had a line of people waiting. And there was only one island, so it wasn't like it had a lot of islands. And there was never a line for gasoline. I mean, someone would pull in, I would immediately come out, because you weren't allowed to pump your own gas in New Jersey. It was just too dangerous. In New Jersey, everything is considered so dangerous that you can't do it. So you're not allowed to pump your own gas because it's too dangerous.
Still can't.
So even to this day, you can't pump you can't pump your own gas in New Jersey because it's just too damn dangerous. I think there's more to it than that, but so that kind of put all the risk on one guy, and it's really kind of stupid because if you think about it, breathing in the fumes, and then if you're the only guy that's pumping the gasoline for everybody who pulls in, then you're breathing fumes all day versus each and every person pumps their own gas. I mean, that might be better than to have one person exposed to gas constantly all day long without a gas mask. But anyway, that was me. So to make a long story short, I mean, we had these long lines, and then every once in a while somebody would try to give you a payoff, or they would say, look, I'll give you an extra $2 if you give me gas today. And it didn't happen very often, but once in a while something like that would happen, and I would always say, no, sorry, can't do that, and they would just go away. I mean, it wasn't like a bad neighborhood or anything, so they would just go away. But I just don't understand why, when you're at a critical time in our Earth's, in the life of the Earth right now, where who is going to be the owner and the controller of the reserve currency, and you're poking Russia right in the eyes, and you're trying to make them angry at you when they're already thinking about starting up this brick thing, and they actually already have a plan, and China's involved in this too, which is even worse because they have huge cash reserves and we owe them a lot of money. So, but they're selling their bonds even at a loss. They're unloading their treasury bonds and buying gold, and using the gold to use that to start their brick bank. And I mean, eventually, unless the United States has a part of the basket of currencies that make the brick, or they may decide to just make the brick gold backed and not have anything to do with the dollar. But I'm just saying, if we're lucky, a lion's share or a good part of the brick, if they in fact go ahead with this brick thing, which I'm convinced they're going to do. I mean, they can't stop it now. The plans are already in motion. We're going to lose the reserve currency status. Now, look, I know that in the last election cycle, Ron Paul, he made a good point. He said we need to do away with the Fed because there's a lot of malfeasance. And if you think about it, you do have somebody there. It's not one person. We don't know who owns it because it's not public information, and we can't force them to tell us who owns the shares of stock in the Fed. And just because it's called the Federal Reserve doesn't mean that it's part of the United States government. It isn't. It's a separate government. It just happens to be called the Federal Reserve. So it's a sort of a trick, in a way, in the name. But on the other hand, I want to say that it was a bad idea to lay the sanctions on Russia for no reason whatsoever, because the Clintons and these oligarchs and the fascists want to make money on war. But now it's happening at the worst possible moment, and with the kind of sanctions that they put on Russia, where they're monetary based, it just gave the Russians more of an excuse to say, okay, we're just not going to deal in dollars. And by the way, we're going to put a sanction on you, and our sanction on you is that we're not going to buy any food from you. And that's going to force us to grow more food, which I guess he saw that as a weakness within his country, and I guess he figured it would stimulate his own agricultural farm, help his own farmers out, because they wouldn't be able to buy food from overseas, anything that they couldn't plant in Russia because it's cold there. So, if they want to buy fruits and vegetables that need a warmer climate, they're going to have to go to South America or whatever. So they're just going to go to Argentina, they're going to go to Brazil, they're going to go to Venezuela, all the countries that in South America now that are starting to hate us because the war on drugs was just nothing but a lot of lies and death and destruction, and really didn't do anything good for them. And so I guess we're just kind of like, we're doing everything that we can to harm ourselves by making these sanctions, putting these sanctions against Russia, and now getting involved in the war because the Eastern people want to break away and they want to become Russians, and we're saying no, 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 you can't do that. Well, yes, I'm sorry, you can. I mean, the UN, Section 1 in the UN Charter, it says that the people shall have the right to self-determination. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't say that I know exactly what that means, but I'm not an idiot either. I understand the English language. It seems to me that that kind of infers that that the language was meant to infer that, look, if you want to quit the country that you're living in and join the neighbor country, and the neighbor country wants to have you, in an effort to keep everyone happy instead of everybody going to war, the UN recognizes that, the signatories recognize that, look, if the Ukraine wants to break off, it's not if they have a vote, we can't turn around and say, well, it's an illegal vote because it's violating there's another section on there that says something about the integrity of the countries and the continuity of the countries or whatever. But to me, I would think that when you say that people shall have the right to self-determination, that's sort of like an overriding clause that goes above and beyond. I would like to think that, for example, if Florida doesn't want to have anything to do with the United States, that they could break away. Now, they would lose any benefit that they derive from being a member of the United States. For example, they would not have access to the Social Security system, and in Florida we have a lot of retirees, so now Washington could say, well, go screw, we're not going to make good on your Social Security checks, we're not going to give you Medicaid, we're not going to give you Medicare. And then the state of Florida people would retaliate, and they would say, well, so what, we're not going to have to pay the IRS anymore. So is one going to offset the other? I mean, I don't know. I would think that Washington really can't give you more than you give it, but in the case of the United States, they sort of can, because they have the Fed, and the Fed can print money, and Washington, if it needs to pay Social Security recipients and there's not enough money to pay, and they're already, we all know they're in the red to some 17 or 18 trillion dollars. That's what's on the books. I mean, then you have contingent liabilities and off-balance sheet paperwork and so forth. So I believe that the promises made probably exceed $200 trillion. But it's like Alan Greenspan said, the United States can always pay every debt because they can print the money. But what if the money isn't acceptable? Well, it wouldn't really matter in the United States, because someone in the United States is going to accept a dollar, but as soon as you go to buy something from China or something from Russia, not that we buy anything from Russia, but I mean the Europeans buy gas from Russia, and Russia's still taking, they'll take euros, I guess, for gas, but If the United States, if I wanted to buy something from Russia, they could say, I don't want to take your dollar, and then, I mean, where's that going to leave me? Well, fortunately, I live in the United States of America, and pretty much anything I need I can get here, and no matter what country is angry at me, we make almost everything in the United States. Now, I might not like the price because the cost of labor is higher in the United States, but that's just because the workers make more, and we have an awful lot of laws, and the country, you know, when you're working for a country, you have more rights than if you're working in Mexico or somewhere where if I'm working on a job and I break my arm or something like that, I can get I have rights to get workers' compensation. If I pop my eye out, I can get benefits for workers' compensation if it happens at work. I can also sue. I guess there are ways to sue the company even though you get workers' comp, or you can reject the workers' comp, and in lieu you could sue if there's negligence on part of the employer. So the employer in the United States is under a lot of pressure because they have laws, and so the cost of manufacturing is higher in the United States, but presumably it's made up for by the fact that the people who are actually doing the work have more benefits. So you would expect a happier workforce, but in fact the workers in the United States in a lot of cases are saying, you know, they're not happier, and by the time the taxes are taken out of their pay, they might as well be working in China because they can rent a house in China for $50 a month instead of $1,500 a month, and the taxes might be less. But if they get hurt on the job, they're not going to get anything. And I don't know what happens to you in China if you get hurt on the job. You probably don't have any benefits. They probably just kick you out or fire you or whatever. But the point is, if you live in America, you're not so susceptible to the fact that the greenback may, in fact, at some point, and probably sooner than later, be, if not rejected, it may be shunned and by other countries where they may say, well, you know what, if you're going to buy a solar panel from me, I'd rather you pay me in bricks, which would be, you know, the new currency that the BRIC nations are going to come out with because it's backed by gold, and you can't just print them, you have to have gold backing it. And that's the whole theory behind having the BRIC currency, because these other countries putting two and two together over the last several years are starting to say, well, look, the United States just went through a great recession, and they were able to bail themselves out by simply printing money, and their credit rating is high, you know, really high. It's been unaffected. And then to plunge the fingers into the eyes of Russia, they lowered their credit rating. You know, if Moody's or S&P tries to lower the credit rating of the United States based upon how much debt the country is in versus its GDP, which by, I mean, any reasonable person would say, well, look, if you have a GDP of a certain percentage and then you owe more than that in debt, you know, at some point you have to start to say, hey, the credit rating of the country is going down. But, you know, if they can keep borrowing money, and at a very low interest too, which in a way that in of itself is a sort of terrible unfairness to people who all their life save money. I mean, coming from an Italian family, I was told to save money, and then someday when you retire, you're going to be able to have interest. And but you need to save an awful lot of money to be able to live off your interest. And now it's literally impossible. The interest that you would get, the bank doesn't even want you as a depositor anymore. So the interest is so low, but it has to be low because the government is in such debt that if the interest was representative of what it really should be, and what I think it really should be is, you know, how hard is it as an ordinary citizen to make a dollar and then save that dollar versus having to spend it for gasoline or insurance or electric bill for your house or a mortgage on your house or taxes on your house or to buy a car. You really need an awful lot of dollars, and so it's hard to save any money. And then even if you were able to save a dollar, the bank is going to just say, we really don't want you as a depositor. You only have a $500,000, and $500,000 is really not that much money, and we'd rather just want it to just go away. Well, if you were in Russia, they would probably pay you 10 or 12, or I think the interest rate went all the way up to like 17 or 18% right after we put the sanctions on them. I mean, it would have been a good investment to convert your American dollars into Russian ruble currency for a while, because the interest went up so high. You could have made a lot of money on the interest, and now it's coming back down. So it's sort of coming, it's normalizing, and people are kind of getting used to the sanctions, and the Russians have been able to get around it. So it really kind of didn't matter anyway. And in the end, the laugh is going to be, against us, and they're going to have the final laugh, because they're going to have their own SWIFT system, and they're already out of our system because they're not allowed to use it. And then there's another real funny thing, like the PayPal company is not allowed to do business with the Ukraine. So I guess they're allowed to do business with the Nazi side of Ukraine, the west side, but the east side, the people that voted to become Russians, PayPal and U.S. banks, they're not allowed to do business with them. They're sanctioned the same as Russia is. So PayPal froze the account, and I think it was a published number, like about 2 months ago. I saw the number was published. They froze the account of some like $5,000. I think there was a total of $5,000 in all the PayPal accounts of all the people that had PayPal accounts in all the affected area in the eastern side of Ukraine. So it wasn't like there was a lot of money involved, but it's the principle of thing, because then the people see that, and then they're like, well, I don't want to deal with the Americans, and even if at some point in the future we win their confidence back and we all become friends again, I mean, they're going to remember this, and they're not going to want to do business with us. So, I mean, it's just not worth having enemies around the world. Now, all that said, if I were in charge of the United States, first of all, I wouldn't have done that, because basically the United States is in a situation where, being the reserve, or having been, I guess, and we still are, I suppose, except for this brick thing is starting up. I mean, we are the reserve currency of the world, and our lifestyle has been 2 or 3 times better than our lifestyle would have been if we weren't the reserve currency of the world. Now, it's given us the ability to print money, because not the government, because the government doesn't own the printing press, but when the government needs a loan to keep itself running so that its public servants, they like to call themselves officials, but they're just servants to me, when they want to get their pension and their raise, and Social Security recipients who really, I wouldn't want to do anything to cut them off. I mean, so they deserve what they deserve their check, and you have people on disability, and they deserve their check, and you have Medicare and Medicaid and food stamp program, and these programs are necessary. And I mean, you have to have a safety net, and you have to have a retirement plan. In Russia, they have a safety net so that no one is going to starve to death, and that people have pensions. I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. And it's good to be able to pick the telephone up as the president, or I guess would be the chief of the Treasury, would pick up the telephone and call the Fed up and say, hey, I need to issue another $1 trillion worth of bonds. And then Janet Yellen over there, the chief of the Fed, would say, sure, no problem. And by the way, we'll give you a really good interest rate. So if the interest rate were high, the United States wouldn't be able to pay its past due debt, because you have to remember, the taxes that are paid in now have to pay not only to keep the government running, but have to pay the interest on the money that was already borrowed. So if that interest isn't damn near zero, which means that you're really not paying back your past due debt, because you're not paying your principal, and if the interest is damn near zero, you're not really paying any interest either. So it's kind of like you're riding in the float and you're not really paying this money back. And I mean, this party can keep going for a long time, and as long as the people in the world are willing to accept the dollar then as currency, then that'll keep going. So I mean, at this point, when you're in a position that we're in now, and then to turn around and have the brass cajuntes to stick your fingers in Putin's eyes, and you know, he already is aware of this, and then to stick your finger in his eyes and piss him off and just give him an excuse to start, you know, to get the brick thing, you know, to accelerate this whole brick thing and get it going even faster, thus throwing us out of the world reserve currency, is not good, because now countries around the world aren't going to want to buy into with their spare savings. Not that the world economy is doing so well that a lot of people have savings that they can borrow U.S. Treasury bonds. I mean, I suspect that when you see countries like the Dutch just bought a few months ago, they bought I don't know the number, but it's an ungodly amount of billions of dollars worth of our treasury, and it was more than their gross domestic product. So they didn't just buy our treasuries. They probably were lent treasury money from the treasury, and then they were told or advised to lend that back. In other words, they cut a deal that said, look, the Treasury said, look, we'll lend you, you know, $10 billion if you buy $10 billion worth of Treasury, and we'll pay you a little bit more interest than we're going to charge you on the loan, because the other country is going to say, why would you do this? And so they're doing this with other countries to sort of spread it around and make it look like these other countries are actually investing in the United States, and they're really not. But on the other hand, I just want to, I don't know if Janet Yellen is watching me or anyone from the Fed, but I am sort of the opposite of Ron Paul. I mean, I don't really like it, but I understand that it's better to have an arm's length transaction between the bank, who you're borrowing money from, and the government itself. Because at any time, the government can say, hey, look, I mean, the president could pick the phone up and call up the Fed and say, look, we want a better interest rate, or we want negative interest. Remember, there's nothing to stop them from going into negative interest, which means borrowing money could actually be a money-making proposition. And as long as the Fed's willing to go along with it, and believe me, they will, because the government gave them the full franchise to print the money. So why wouldn't they? I mean, if their franchise is at risk, because the government might say, well, look, if you don't do what we say, we're going to yank your franchise, and then we're going to let my wife print the money. So they're going to say, no, we don't want, you know, Ben's wife printing the money. We want to continue to print the money, so we're going to cooperate with you. But the other countries are seeing that this is happening, and they're starting to say there's an unfairness in this system, and so that's why they want to base this money on the brick. But that said, I have to say that the Fed has been able to keep this so-called system going for so long that I have to give them credit, to the point where I'd have to say, I'm not going to audit the Fed. If I'm the president, I'm not going to audit the Fed, so long as they continue to cooperate and help the United States government. And at some point, we may want to look at maybe some debt forgiveness just between the United States and the Fed, because it is an arm's length transaction. The United States could pick the phone up and they could cut a backroom deal. It could be signed off by a judge, and some of the debt could be forgiven, just as if it were a bankruptcy or a reorganization or something like that. And then that way, the American people would never have to pay the money back. And we already received the services that the money provided, and as long as the world was willing to take the dollar, and they're still willing to take the dollar, although they're less enthusiastic about it now as they were before. But I mean, if we can avoid pissing them off anymore, we could literally keep this thing going a long time. And it's not something you really want to outwardly talk about, but the point is, I don't think that I don't think that it's cool that we don't know who owns the Fed. The whole thing to this is not that they can print money, it's that there could be malfeasance, or there could be players that are playing God or enriching themselves through a franchise system that should only be printing money for the government when it needs it. And whether it makes money at loans to other countries or not, that's actually good, because it puts other governments on the hook for American dollars, and it keeps the currency of record US dollars, and you want that. So I would have to kind of say, look, I'm gonna hold my nose, and I'm not going to audit the Fed. And as long as they can keep this thing going, Janet Yellen, you've got the green light for me. I just think it would be wiser that the Fed is doing a good job, and frankly, it's the United States Congress who makes the budget that is not controlling the budget and having to borrow too much money. But the Fed has always been cooperative, and I would just say I would like to know who are the owners of the Fed. I'd like a little more information that way, and but I won't audit the Fed. I give you my word on that. So okay, and the reason is because I think you're doing a good job, and you're being confronted with a lot of demands for loans from the U.S. government, and you've done what's right with the interest rates. But I am going to be asking you for a QE4, and that will be, like I told you before, it's going to be a straight to the SBA and straight to our businesses, because we have to reindustrialize the United States. But I will not audit you, and I'm going to entrust you. As long as you can keep things going like you've been going, I think you've been doing a good job. But we need a QE for our businessmen. And thanks very much. And I'll give more of an explanation for that later. But for purposes of this show, we'll just end it on that note. Okay, thanks. Take care of yourself, everybody. Stay safe, and stay healthy, and try to save as much money as you can. All right, thanks.